if you hit W and you hold down Control and you tap a polygroup here, so for example, we Control tap this eyeball, it's going to just unmask the eyeball, and you can move those around separately. Another option you can do is, if I go into the Move brush, you're going to see we have two options in here. You can mask by polygroups, and you can do topological. Now, because these items aren't vert welded, and what that means is if I Control Shift this eyeball, none of those vertices are welded to the head. They're just sitting in there, right? So if I turn on topological, and I go and select this, as soon as I touch the eyeball, it's gonna know that the eyeball I'm touching is all part of one object, so it'll just move the vertices on that object within my brush radius. If I do the opposite and I just touch the head, now the eyeball is going to stay in place and the head's going to move around it. Now, of course, the head's going to move around the nose ring too, because the nose ring is a completely different subtool. To activate it, you have to Alt-tap the nose ring, and that'll activate it, and then we'll go back to the head here. But because the head and the eyeballs are all part of one subtool now, I have to use these auto-masking options in order to manipulate them. Now, if you are so inclined, you can go up here to Mask by Polygroups, and if you crank that up to 100, now when you use the Move brush with Mask by Polygroups up to 100, you can move just the eyeballs around because they're all one polygroup, and this is all one polygroup here. In fact, if we hold down Control and mask this area, hit Control W to Group Mask, Clear Mask, now when you move this polygroup, you're going to see the green one doesn't get touched. So no matter what you're doing, whatever object you touch first or whatever polygroup you touch first, that's the polygroup it's going to manipulate. Let's go ahead and undo that and Control Drag to unmask. One more thing to mention is this Mask by Polygroups is global. So if I go from the Move brush to the Clay brush to the Standard brush, all of that still is in effect. So let's do this again. Control W. So now with my Standard brush, like I said, we start sculpting on here. It's going to completely ignore that one. If I go to my Clay brush, we start sculpting on this one. It's going to completely ignore my green. So just something to keep in mind. This is a global value. However, topological is not. Clay brush doesn't have it. Standard brush doesn't have it. When we go back to our Move brush, we did have that turned on. Now, speaking of Move Topological, if you hit the B key, you're going to see we have a Move Topological available to us. All that is your Move brush with Topological selected. I don't use it that much, so I usually just tend to grab my Move brush and turn Topological on. However, if you use it a lot, you can assign a hotkey to Move Topological. You can also hit the comma key, go up here to Brush, Move, and there's a few more move options in here that you might find interesting. All you gotta do is double click it, and it'll make it available to you in your brush menu. One thing I'm going to add to the end of this video, because we're talking about auto masking, for instance, if I take this brush over here and we go down and we have under auto masking, so we're talking about mask by polygroups and also topological. There's also something we use a lot, which is backface masking. So if we have a cube and we make it really thin, we scale it out, and I'm going to go ahead and go to Geometry, Dynamesh, and just turn Dynamesh on. So now we have, and I'm going to make these even thinner. So let's say you're making a cape or something, and you know what, I'll even give you a sneak preview. Let's go ahead and use our Bend Arc deformer and go ahead and bend this around like some sort of cape-like or armor-like object here. So if I go into my clay brush here, and I'm using my clay brush, and I'm kind of building this up, let's use my clay build up, and we'll kind of pull out some cool shapes, and then I Control Drag to Dynamesh, it's going to do this. And you're going to be like, oh, what is this? So if you look on the back, it's going to be pulling the object through. So what's happening is if you use, say, for instance, your clay buildup, because this object is way thinner than the brush width or the brush radius, as I pull out, it's going to pull out from the other side. So what you're going to want to do is turn on backface masking. And now when we use this brush, it's not going to touch the back. Now, again, this isn't global like Mask by Polygroups. This is per brush. So if I have clay tubes and then I go to clay brush, it's going to turn off. So I got to go through here and turn on for clay brush, turn on for trim dynamic, turn on for H polish, turn on for my standard brush. So when I go through and I sculpt, it doesn't pull on the other side, and I can continue to Dynamesh. Same thing as if you go to, well, we'll just do it for this one. We'll do drag rect, and we'll use the star, focal shift to -100, crank that Z intensity up. If backface masking is off, it's going to pull through the entire mesh. If backface masking is on, it's going to ignore the back of the mesh. So now, one brush you probably don't want to turn it on for is like a Move brush. If you turn on backface masking for Move brush, you're going to see it kind of does some weird things because it's just masking things that are away from your camera. As well as if you're using Sculptris Pro mode. If you turn backface masking off, you're going to see I can use Sculptris Pro. However, if I turn backface masking on, it's going to gray that out as of this recording. Now, because this isn't global, if you want to, like, so I have my standard brush, it's, well, here we go. We'll go brush. At the very bottom of the brush menu, we have reset all brushes. So now we know the standard brush, it just reloads all the brushes from your brush file. So we go to standard, And then we turn on backface masking. So if you want standard to always have backface masking on, if you go to the brush saving video from the intro series, you can go to Brush, Save As. We're going to go to ZBrush 2018, ZData, Brush Presets, and if you find standard in here, right here, you can go ahead and save over this, and it'll save that setting with your standard brush. I would maybe copy those brushes out just in case, and have them somewhere just in case you accidentally mess up your base default standard brushes from ZBrush in a weird way. You can always roll back, but that's one way you can save over a default brush and have it update the backface mask settings. Now, let's say you're past the point of no return. You've already saved the file. You can't go back through your undos, and you end up with a shape like this where it's like, you know what, I know it doesn't look like it, but let's say we spent a lot of time making this shape, and I don't want to have to go back through and redo it with backface masking on. I just want to clean this up a little bit. You can use Dynamesh as kind of clay tools. So if we go into solo mode here, and we go into our BI brush insert primitives, if I want to recreate this shape, I'm just going to grab a primitive that most closely resembles that. And if it's just a weird shape, I'd grab a sphere and kind of mush it into place, kind of like spackle. You're basically going in here and you're putting in a little blob just to kind of take up this interior shape that you have already kind of blocked out. So again, BI brush insert primitives, hit M. I'll grab a cube, and I'm just going to insert that cube right on here. And we're just going to use this as kind of a clay spackle. So we're just going to move this. Let's turn on local symmetry. And I'm just going to push this into shape here. And we're just going to fill out where this needs to go. If you need to, you can hold down Shift, and you can kind of smooth. And again, we're just going to fill up this shape. You can use your inflate brush, whatever you need to do to kind of fill this out. So we'll maybe inflate this bottom here. And if you look in the bottom here, if we want to really close this hole, we can just go through here and just kind of mush this out. Control drag again, and now you have a much nicer mesh. It's all cleaned up. There's no more holes you need to worry about. Fill it in with a little shape that you can Dynamesh together, and then you're kind of back where you started.